Hi all, this video is meant to be a quick review of Sylvia Wynter's concept, genres of being human. So first to start with the word genre. It refers to, the same type of genre that you might use to describe a genre of a book, of a movie, of a type of music. So like country music versus hip hop. Country and hip hop are different genres of music. And now the term human. So she's talking about a notion, a theoretical, philosophical understanding of human beyond just the biological. So beyond just the fact that humans have brains and we have opposable thumbs. She's thinking about something bigger than just that, a concept of human both in body and in mind. And so she's undoing the idea that was constructed by French philosopher Descartes around the 17th century, that the mind and body are separate. So what does it really mean to others and to ourselves to be human and to experience humanity? We can understand dominant social categories, in particular race, class, gender, and sexuality, each as different genres of being human. So just like we can understand country as a type of music, we can understand race as a genre of being human, as a type, as a mode through which we can understand being human. So within the current order in Western society, we'll get to that term in a bit, in which we live, according to these dominant categories of being human, race, class, gender, and sexuality, to be white, to have money and education, to be a cis man, to be hetero or straight, is to be more human, to be more valued, more empathized with, more idealized, taken more seriously, listened to. Your trauma is heard, value is shown both in thought and in action, and government resources allocated. So thinking about this, in which to be white, to have money and education, to be a cis man, to be hetero, is to be more human, more valued, more empathized with, more idealized, taken more seriously. This is within dominant political and economic structures and dominant external and internalized ideologies that shape how people think and act in spaces of what we can call the West. So internalized in that a lot of people for whom these ideologies are harmful have internalized many of these ideologies and come to think of them almost as if they were their own. So why the focus on the West, and what do we mean here by the West? So in general, the West refers to Europe and places that were literally colonized by Europe. So here I'm putting out this video from the United States that is included within the West, as well as places that are heavily influenced by European ideology, or maybe spaces heavily influenced by a European ideology, spaces kind of thinking beyond just material places, but maybe online spaces and other spaces of conversation and dialogue. And this construction of the West dates all the way back, in this particular ideology of the human within the West dates all the way back to the Enlightenment era of the 1700s, when the concept of human and humanism was first produced. And to learn more about that, you can refer back to the encyclopedia entry by Darity on humanism, and you can also see the reading by Louise Pratt. So these genres of being human, according to Sylvia Wynter, which we could call world historical genres. It's not just any old, category that we understand humans through. It is very different, for example, to talk about differences of age in comparison to differences of gender, because there is a whole history of how gender has influenced people across time in all of these different ways across the world. It is world historical. And so these genres of being human explain all of the isms, they're quoting Sylvia Wynter, and how they intersect, how they all condition each other at the same time, shape each other at the same time in all of our experiences of, just living. And so racism, sexism, classism, capitalism, nationalism, these are, some of the key isms that she refers to that are explained by genres of being human. So these genres, again, world historical genres, explain all of the isms and how they intersect. And so here we can understand this. I'm going to move myself over here. In relation to, so Wynter in her interview shares a couple examples of how we can understand how genres of being human functions. She talks about Margaret Thatcher, and she also talks about Condoleezza Rice. And so she says, someone like Margaret Thatcher grew up in the lower middle class. And so she, was kind of, and also we can understand her as a woman. So maybe, within these dominant structures in which we live, in regards to gender and in regards to class, we can see her as wanting to cling to that which makes her more human, both in the eyes of someone who has internalized these structures and ideologies for understanding what is human, and in the eyes of the majority of people around us in this world who have also internalized or maybe actively understand and practice and are passionate about in a very harmful way this idea of who is human and who matters. So someone who might be, Wynter describes someone who might be in kind of lower middle class, that is striving to just get just a little bit up, just get a little bit more stable, a little bit more education, maybe a little bit higher of a pay to feel like they're really solidly in that middle class. And so people often cling onto that which makes them feel more powerful. So if we go back up, to be more human, so to be white, to have money and education, to be a cis man, to be hetero. So Margaret Thatcher, she was white, so she's going to want to cling onto her whiteness within, again, this kind of dominant structure and ideology. She clings onto her whiteness, that gives her more power and makes her feel stronger. She can establish her voice and to have more authority. She's kind of then pushing for more money because she's kind of maybe feeling her humanity less. And so because she feels less, because she has less money, oftentimes people then will want to cling on to that which makes them give them more value and more humanity. So she's holding on to her whiteness to make her feel more strong and powerful and authoritative, holding on to her, I don't know that much about Margaret Thatcher, but, potentially holding on to also her heterosexuality in some ways as well. And so we can see that in a lot of different spaces. Wynter also talks about the example of Condoleezza Rice, in which Condoleezza Rice was also someone who was kind of the lower middle class. And we can see how, Wynter theorizes that someone that maybe feels a little bit less because they're not as high of a class position as they want to be in, to be able to feel more human, to feel more powerful, more valued. Then they cling on to that which does give them power. And for, Condoleezza Rice is holding on to things, this position in government and aligning with whiteness, even as a Black woman, aligning with George W. Bush and other people with an incredible amount of power. And so we can also understand in the reading from last week, the example that Jemima Pierre, anthropologist Jemima Pierre, shares of her ethnographic experiences in Haiti and in Ghana, and she describes them as experiences of which she can understand them in relation to what Michel Triot, whose ethnography we're going to read, called Silencing the Past, what he has theorized as the savage slot. So we have those who are human, and then kind of in contrast, we can understand people who fit within a slot of that which is understood as not human, that which is understood as savage. You can look up that reading on The Savage Slot by Trio if you'd like. And not only are these genres of being human harmful to those who are valued, understood, and treated as being less human, as mattering less, but also they are harmful to those who are predicating their own humanity on this harm of others. So it's like that famous quote by writer Toni Morrison, pictured above. Quote, "If you can only be tall because someone else is on their knees, then you have a serious problem. And white people have a very, very serious problem." It's also like another quote and writing that James Baldwin has written about, again, focusing on racism in white people. We could broaden this out to also think about, for example, cis heteropatriarchy and, the effect on people who really value themselves as being tall, as being better because they are straight, because they fit within the gender binary, right? So as James Baldwin writes, quote, "Rather, the white man is himself in sore need of new standards, which will release him from his confusion and place him once again in fruitful communion with the depths of his own being. And I repeat, the price of the liberation of the white people is the liberation of the blacks, the total liberation in the cities and the towns before the law and in the mind." So with all of this in mind, Wynter does have hope, and she has hope in what she theorizes as a, quote, "re-enchanted humanism." So a new understanding and set of possibilities for what humanism, a real, actual humanism for all people could be, not just a humanism that assumes that there is this kind of universal subject in which the universal is actually a white, cis, hetero man with money and education and property, which Mary Louise Pratt talks about in the reading we did last week. So what does Sylvia Wynter have hope in? So she finds pieces, already existing practices of this re-enchanted humanism already in practice and being lived by Black artists in particular. So I'm going to jump to an article that discusses this by Talisa Feliciano called "Framing the Other, Otherwise Underground." And here we're on the site cullanth.org. And so she describes, "The evening sun is setting as I descend a staircase underground. I pay money to enter the space." So she's in New York City at the subway. "It is an urban public space and thus smells of structural neglect and neoliberalism. There's paint peeling on the walls, garbage on the floors, and a severe rat infestation. Heavily armed police with assault rifles, dressed in Kevlar, and positioned at the entrances wait for fare beaters or terrorists. I descend more stairs to a platform waiting, among hordes of other people, for a public train. One of the oldest and largest public transit systems in the world, the New York Metropolitan Transit Authority is the larger infrastructural entity that manages public transportation. A train enters the station. Once on board, an automated voice announces, 'Stand clear of the closing doors, please.' The train begins to rumble out of the station. There are 3 or 4 young men in fitted caps, sweats, and worn sneakers. One of them carries a portable speaker, while another scans the train for the police. Yet another asks standing commuters to step aside. Suddenly, I hear the customary oration, 'What time is it?' To which the other youth respond in unison, 'Showtime.' They begin to hip-hop dance in the center of the subway car for 1 to 2 minutes, ending with, 'Clap it up, show love, not hate. We accept quarters, pennies, nickels, dimes, EBT, food stamps, Metro cards, and even a smile.' Some people seem visibly uncomfortable as they hold tight onto their belongings or let out dramatically audible sighs, never quite looking at, but instead through the young men. So not really seeing them as humans, but trying to ignore them, trying to make them an object they can just kind of, right? But others meet the youth in their exertion of their being. Amidst their scattered and hesitant applause, the youth accept monetary donations, handshakes, or verbal encouragement from these passengers become audience. The youth then sit at the next station, vanishing onto the crowded platform." Talisa continues, and Talisa is an anthropologist, also at the Graduate Center program. Courtesy Underground. In 2015, the MTA launched a Courtesy Counts poster campaign. Showtime is the only busking activity explicitly targeted by the campaign, implicating it as criminal. It is also explicitly targeted by the New York City Police Department as a so-called quality of life issue. Both forms of policing operate under the dehumanizing association of Black and brown male youth within the potential for criminality. This false link then leads to the very real fact of overrepresentation of racialized male youth as criminal. Showtime performers put this distortion of the category human on view in the public transit places where they perform. I'm sure many of you had seen this sign right here. I'm going to skip forward a little bit here. And so Talisa argues at the end here, Showtime is a performative disruption that is re-articulated daily as part of the mundane. So mundane is something kind of normal that happens often. It tells the audience, quote, "I'm here, I exist, I deserve to be here. I am gushing with creativity and energy despite these racist notions surrounding me," close quote. The perception of these performers often vacillates between, or kind of oscillates, switches back and forth between whether or not they should be criminalized. In fact, their humanity itself is always in question. Yet, for every moment of praise and validation, every instance in which these youth are humanized and otherwise comes into being, forcing passengers to experience this public space and the category human differently. As discussed in the interview with ProudFlesh that you read for today, the interviewer said to her that she once said, maybe paraphrasing slightly, quote, "When I write, I want to sound in theory the way Aretha Franklin sounds in song." And Sylvia Wynter responded, "Yes, I think I would like to feel that everything I said had a liberating and emancipatory dimension." That's what she has. Black singing at its best. It has this, like gospel, that I wanted. But also I was always aware that it wasn't that I was thinking anything linearly, kind of in a straight line. It never came linearly. It tends to come the way a flower blooms. It comes unexpectedly, and it has nothing to do with genius. It has to do with this beginning to question your own consciousness. It's the idea of poesis. Again, there is also a poesis of thought, a new poesis of being human. These concepts don't come in a linear fashion. They build up, you know. So as you're talking, they build up and they build up the way music builds up and up and up until you get that sudden ...